I'm Not For Scoop, our weekly conversation on international media. We look at who shapes a narrative, explore journalistic ethics, and ask the reporters the difficult questions. With trust in the press at a nadir, it's a critical eye on a critical profession. Journalism is about power. It relies on the power of information. In the best case scenario, it holds those in power to account. In the worst, it provides propaganda. Nowhere are the stakes higher than at war.
Scores of American reporters have now joined U.S. military units in Kuwait as part of the Pentagon's effort to make any war with Iraq what the Pentagon calls a media-friendly campaign.
Embedded journalism, a term that came about during the U.S.'s invasion of Iraq in 2003. It's when a reporter is placed with and under the control of one side in an armed conflict. This is a clip from John Pilger's documentary, The War You Don't See.
Most of the reports that viewers saw came from within a system in which media organizations agreed to certain conditions laid down by the Ministry of Defense in London and the Pentagon in Washington.
At the time that our forces crossed into Iraq, we had some 700 reporters embedded throughout our military formations. We knew we were going up against an enemy that was somewhat masterful at misinformation, disinformation.
So embedded journalism earned a bad name after the war in Iraq, but has since become a standard sort of a method for reporting on conflict. 6 months ago, Ukraine's United 24 filed this report on frontline fighting against Russia, a glimpse into the horrors of war and the dangers of reporting on it. It's already been viewed about 3 million times on YouTube.
As a journalist working in war zones, I guess one would say you do quite a few things that a lot of people would call borderline irresponsible, but this today might well be the most irresponsible of them all. Behind me are Ukrainian paratroopers, and we're embedding with them. The mission is to hold the first line of defense outside a small village which has been taken by the Russian army just a couple of days ago.
Well, here to tell us more about embedded journalism and give us some firsthand experiences is France 24 senior reporter Catherine Norris-Trent. Hello to you, Catherine.
I will.
Some glaring errors back in that war in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Has international media learned its lesson since then, or do you still see some of us making those mistakes?
For sure, no one is perfect. But I think things have changed a bit since the war in Iraq. We're a lot more skeptical about what the military is going to tell us. Of course, we all know about the intelligence failures and the consequences more of that war now. So perhaps I'd like to think we go in with a perhaps more critical standpoint. I know that a lot of the reporting in that war was accused of sanitizing the war as well, of not showing the losses. Perhaps that was some of the conditions for going in. I myself, I have to say, didn't go into Iraq embedded. I'm not quite that old yet. But yeah, I think perhaps we try and show the reality, go in with a critical mindset. I'm sure a lot of the reporters who did embed, by the way, tried to do that. But yeah, we're more questioning of conditions perhaps than we used to be. And of course, technology has advanced a huge amount as well. So it's not just like, that was the first war that could be broadcast live on TV. Now, it's on social media as well. So that's another consideration to take into account, just when and where you post things for your own security as well.
Yeah, and the way this debate is often framed is critics of embedded journalism say it removes impartiality. Proponents say, well, it's easier to cover a war than from thousands of kilometers away. Where do you come down on that?
I always think you've got to be on the ground to see what is going on. You're only going to get a partial picture from being embedded because you have certain conditions imposed on you, security conditions. We as a network never accept editorial conditions for going on embeds. That's a red line for us. But you're going to have some kind of rules because it's a military organization. The military is rules-based. So they won't let you, for example, film certain places which are strategic, or they won't let you just, run off somewhere and the troops have to come and bring you back. You have a set of rules to abide by. But at least you're getting some partial picture. You're getting some atmosphere. You're speaking to the guys off camera. You're definitely getting more information than you are if you're just not there, basically.
Yeah, Catherine's recently back from a trip where she was embedded with the Ukraine's military as they crossed into the Russian region of Kursk. Let's take a look at that report.
Some locals come to collect food parcels, but are largely suspicious or hostile to the Ukrainian troops.
Putin is Putin. He's a great guy. What can I say about him? He knows what he's doing.
Why don't you just take us all out and shoot us? You think everything's our fault.
Catherine, that report filmed and shot in September. One of the criticisms of embedded journalism, you only get one side of the conflict and you don't hear what civilians on the other side of that conflict are saying. But there we got a glimpse. Were you surprised at how candid they were?
Yes, totally. So they said basically we could speak to any civilians we could find in the villages. And so I was concerned perhaps, they're going to introduce us to pro-Ukrainian civilians.
Or have people set up in advance,
right,
perhaps?
Exactly. And that actually wasn't the case. So we went to these couple of villages. We were supposed to go to the town of Sudzha, but we couldn't go because we were told it was too dangerous. So we went to these couple of villages. And I think maybe for our reporting that was a good thing because the emotions were more raw. We found people who hadn't been interviewed a number of times. And we could ask and film whatever we wanted. So I have to say that to the Ukrainian army. They did not try and stop us filming there. Some of the hostility towards them, some of the anger from residents there, the pro-Putin views of people there, they weren't trying to hide it. They did put conditions on us, and we weren't allowed to shoot some of the buildings where Ukrainian troops were stationed in case they were a target. But we were allowed to ask whatever questions and film, apart from that, anything else we wanted.
And how did the Ukrainian military respond to some of those criticisms? We see the images of them speaking with the locals there.
Well, they were pretty used to it. They'd been in Kursk for around 4 weeks at that stage, and they knew that, these often elderly people who'd been left behind had been imbibed with Kremlin propaganda for years. And even this close to the Ukrainian border, you could see it. So we actually saw them going around talking with people. Oh, that's me. We actually saw them going around talking to people, showing them pictures on an iPad or a tablet, showing them, look, this is the reality of the war in Ukraine. This is Russian troops who did this, and trying to break these beliefs that have been built up for ages. So, it wasn't a surprise for them, but they let these people kind of vent their anger, and they're trying to reason with them to varying degrees of success.
And did they have skepticism towards you as a reporter?
Yeah, some of them were not friendly. Some of them didn't want to talk to us, which is totally fine. Obviously, we never.
And that happens here.
Yeah, we never force anyone to speak to us. But a lot of the people were actually okay. I was surprised by how willing they were to speak to us. I think these are people who were, wanting to evacuate back to Russia. They openly told us that, and so they wanted to get their anger, their frustration across, and tell us how things were for them. And presumably, they wouldn't be friendly to government's views, our media's views, but on an individual level, we could have quite good conversations with them.
And Ukraine's offensive into the Kursk region made international headlines, but very few journalists got to go there and cover it. How did you gain access?
So we asked our sources at the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, and
hounded them.
My wonderful producer Ilya hounded them, and they wanted to take us because I think the Ukrainians see an interest in talking about the Kursk offensive. It's going to be one of their negotiating trips. So obviously we're not coming from the same perspective. We want to go and make a report. They want to talk about what they're doing in Kursk. But we hounded them and we managed to get a place on this press trip. So there were a couple of other media outlets with us when we were taken in there. A Ukrainian TV and a Swiss-Italian radio station. And they took us in and we found what we could find for a few hours and then had to get out. So it's limited, but I still think it's interesting.
Yeah, and you said France 24 doesn't accept these missions if there's any editorial conditions.
Absolutely.
Did Ukraine want editorial conditions at first?
No, they did not. So they asked us to submit the pictures of a report, not the text. We didn't have to submit the script. They want to basically check that we are not filming any strategic buildings which could be then viewed and used by Russian forces to target missile strikes against them. So that is the only condition, basically, that we accepted, and it's one that is pretty standard with embedded reporting. You'll find it, for example, I know journalists who've gone into Gaza with the Israeli forces, they've had to do the same thing. It's pretty standard. They don't want you to film strategic sites which could then be used, as target practice.
Yeah, you mentioned journalists embedding with the Israeli military in Gaza, CNN, BBC, France 24. A couple of channels that got criticism for doing that. Less criticism for embedding with the Ukrainian military. Why is that? Can you contrast that?
I got plenty of criticism from the Russian side. Don't be under any illusions about that. People saying I'm carrying out Ukrainian propaganda, even though you can see in my report that I'm putting in basically things that I'm not necessarily sure the Ukrainian government would love to show. We always get criticism, whatever we do. It's true that journalists who've accepted embeds with the Israeli army into Gaza have been criticized about that because Israel is not allowing any any free access to foreign journalists into Gaza. The only way to go in is with the Israeli military. And obviously, a lot of people very, very critical about their military actions there. I have to say, when France 24 did it, our correspondent did it in a very clever way, I thought. So she filmed her embedded with the Israeli forces, had to submit her images, again, not her script, to the military censor. But then she also integrated into her report pictures that were filmed by a Palestinian journalist that she knows and trusts in Gaza. So we got Palestinian voices in there as well. And I think that was a really good idea.
Yeah, one final question very quickly. What has the response been from Moscow? You alluded to it earlier.
Oh, well, yeah, the FSB, the security services, have opened criminal proceedings into me for illegally crossing a border. And so that means if I set foot on Russian soil and get caught by Russian authorities, I could face 5 years in prison. And just the irony of those charges, Russia is basically occupying, it's across the border into Ukraine, and is occupying around 20% of their territory. But all the journalists, like myself, who've done a trip into Kursk with the Ukrainian army are facing similar charges, and really doesn't apply to me unless I were to attempt to go to Moscow.
Catherine, thank you very much for coming in, sharing us your firsthand experience. And that brings us to our quote of the week, and it comes from the organization Women in Journalism, which condemned Russia's investigation of Catherine, saying, quote, "The unwarranted suppression of media practitioners coupled with the criminalization of their journalistic endeavors represents a severe encroachment on press freedom and a recurring strategy employed by the Russian government to manipulate information dissemination." That's it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.